Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for tuning in this afternoon. My name is Serena Longo, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, I'm so pleased to introduce this virtual event with Vanessa Diaz, presenting her new book, Manufacturing Celebrity, Latino Paparazzi and the Women Reporters in Hollywood, joined in conversation by Jonathan Rosa. Our Friday Forum series takes place on Friday afternoons during the academic year as a way to highlight scholarly books in a wide range of fields. Today's Friday Forum is the first of the season and our first in this new virtual world. We're really glad to be back to them. Our next forum features Boston College sociology professor Juliet B. Shore presenting her new book, After the Gig, How the Sharing Economy Got Hijacked and How to Win It Back, next Friday at 12 p.m. Learn more about this and our many other upcoming virtual events online at harvard.com, where you can also browse our shelves from home. This afternoon's discussion will conclude with some time for your questions. If you have a question for our speakers at any time during the talk, go to the Q&A box to submit. We'll get through as many as time allows. And in just a moment, I'll post the harvard.com link to purchase Manufacturing Celebrity in the chat box. Your purchases and financial contributions. I'll also be posting a link to our donation page on harvard.com. Make this virtual author series possible, and now more than ever, support the future of a landmark independent bookstore. Thank you for tuning in. We sincerely appreciate your support now and always. And finally, as you may have experienced in virtual gatherings these last few months, technical difficulties may arise. If they do, we'll do our best to resolve them quickly. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And now I'm so pleased to introduce our speakers. Vanessa Diaz is a multimedia ethnographer, journalist, and professor whose work focuses on race, gender, and labor in popular culture across the Americas. She's a co-author of UCLA's 2017 Hollywood Diversity Report, director of the film Cuban Hip Hop, and the media editor for the journal Transforming Anthropology. She's joined in conversation today by Jonathan Rosa, Stanford University professor and author of the book, Looking Like a Language, Sounding Like a Race. They'll be discussing Professor Diaz's newest work, Manufacturing Celebrity, which traces the complex power dynamics of the reporting and paparazzi work that fuels contemporary Hollywood and celebrity culture, Latino threat author Leo R. Chavez writes, Vanessa Diaz pulls back the curtain on Hollywood and the people who photograph and write about the movie stars of today and tomorrow. Manufacturing Celebrity is a must-read for anyone desiring keenly observed insights into the struggles of immigrants and women trying to catch some of the stardusts in Hollywood's dream factory. And so now, I'm so pleased to turn things over to today's speakers. The digital podium is yours, Vanessa and Jonathan.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm going to start with a few brief words. And of course, I want to start by thanking Serena and all of the Harvard Bookstore staff for helping organize this. And thank you so much to Jonathan for sharing this precious time when we are all inundated in these ridiculously difficult times, and of course for all of your support. I'm very grateful to have you here with me to share this moment, the very first book event for this. And it's actually really fitting that for the very first book event for Manufacturing Celebrity that I have Jonathan here, because not only did I discuss this research with him while I engaged in the fieldwork process and processing everything that I was observing, but we also co-authored an article together that focuses on institutional racism and white supremacy, where we talked about one of the key cases that the book focuses on, specifically the killing of Paparazzo Chris Guerra, who we'll talk a little bit more about. So rather than read a passage in the interest of getting into our conversation more quickly, I'm just going to offer a little bit of context and reflections on the book that I'm sure our points will all talk more about. First is that my interest in the topic really started to take shape when I started my internship at the New York Bureau of People magazine in 2004. And I immediately started to take note of gender and racial inequalities I saw on the red carpet, in the offices, in different spaces. And then it was when I moved back to Los Angeles and continued doing celebrity reporting here that I noticed even more complex dynamics and started to notice the shift in the demographics of paparazzi to mostly Latino men, and ultimately decided to pursue this research for my doctoral dissertation in anthropology. For those of you who have seen the book or peeked at the introduction, one of the things is that the two main stories that open up the book are the story about Chris, who Jonathan and I wrote about in our article. Chris was hit by 2 cars and killed while following the orders of a California Highway Patrol officer when Chris was trying to photograph Justin Bieber. And the details around his killing are very unclear. And even though we do not know if the police actually pushed him into traffic, they claim he ran into traffic. But again, the details all are provided by law enforcement and they're very murky. But the way that I articulate and understand this killing is that he was policed to death. And so the circumstances that led to his killing had very much to do with the kind of public derision of paparazzi and the way that they've become racialized and criminalized in Hollywood. And in addition to Chris's killing, I also focus on the experience of one of the white women reporters who I worked with at People magazine, who was sexually assaulted by Donald Trump while she was reporting on him for the magazine. This is the story of Natasha Stoinoff, and her story is actually resurfaced in the news again in the last week. The Atlantic did a big piece on her. And she told me about the assault in a recorded interview for the first time in 2011. And while I had seen the women celebrity reporters pushed into different uncomfortable situations throughout my time working for the magazine, Natasha telling me her story was a real clear confirmation about the level of exploitation that women face on the job. So obviously their two positionalities are extremely different, and both the paparazzi and reporters are aware of this. Natasha is keenly aware of the fact that what happened to Chris just never would have happened to her, and what happened to Natasha never would have happened to Chris. And so it's these unique positions and their identities and the way that those are exploited in this process of manufacturing celebrity that I really wanted to highlight and help us understand. And there are lots and lots of layers to work through in the book. And you know, we're in a moment in this country where we're interrogating structural hierarchies and inequalities, but we don't always think about the way that these same foundational structural inequalities that we see in places like government and law enforcement also impact institutions like Hollywood deeply, right? It's also a very major institution in the US, and it's subject to these same kind of power dynamics. And the reality is Hollywood is really full of serious and egregious abuses of power, labor, racism and gender discrimination. We've seen this kind of come out in the news in various ways around the Me Too movement and Oscar So White. But in general, that's, you know, we have moments where that becomes clear, but that's just not the picture we get when we look at beautiful glossy magazines like People and Us Weekly. And so I want to help give people the full picture. The goal isn't to make people hate the magazines or hate Hollywood. It's really, the goal is that you read my book and you never look at these magazines or Hollywood the same again, that it gives you a new set of tools to think about these things. So I'm going to pause there, and you know, I really look forward to talking more about all of these things with my friend and colleague, Jonathan. And thanks for being here, everyone.
Hi, Vanessa, and hi, everyone in the audience. It's great to be in dialogue with you. And I just want to remind all the participants that you should feel free to offer up questions in the Q&A box. And in the last 15 or 20 minutes, we'll open up for a broader dialogue with the participants. But Vanessa, first, congratulations on the book. I'm so excited to have the chance to be in conversation with you early on as you begin sharing this work with the world. And I guess I wanted to just begin by asking you to talk a little bit about what brought you to the work. In the introduction, you make this really provocative statement. You say, you pose this question: how is it that we often know more about celebrities than we do about many friends and neighbors we see in person every day? And so I think you begin by sort of posing this provocative question about the fundamental nature of celebrity. So I guess I wanted to know more about what brought you to research focus on the anthropology of celebrity, because it seems like a very unique sort of focus within the discipline of anthropology.
Yeah, thank you. It's an important and very layered question, how I got to this. But, you know, I mentioned, of course, I started this internship for People magazine in 2004. And sometimes I like to think of that as the starting point. But the reality is, as, you know, a child born in LA and raised in Southern California, you know, the sense of Hollywood and the entertainment industry as this sort of central orienting factor for so many people here in a very localized sense, and then in a broader national and even global sense. You know, if we think about anthropology as the study of every day, there are a few things more every day in the US than our exposure to media and our exposure to celebrities in that media. So I don't think it was an accident that when I was reporting for People magazine, that's all anybody wanted to talk about with me, frankly. Who was there and what were they like, and you know, just who was your favorite celebrity to talk to, and what, you know. And then when I would be at red carpet events and I would see people outside of the red carpet, you know, lined up to take pictures, and I would see young people who are like, oh my God, I love her, oh, I'm so obsessed, and just this like infatuation. And you know, I remember, I think I mentioned this in the book, that there was an event where David Beckham was there, and I heard these two girls like talking and fantasizing about, oh my God, and I'm so in love with him, and he's so amazing. I mean, these really deep, like visceral reactions and connections to celebrities in this personal way. And, you know, this was at a moment where I didn't even know all of my neighbors where I was living. And I know most of my friends didn't. And yet all they wanted to talk about with these celebrities, when I found myself at dinner parties, that's all anybody wanted to talk about was celebrities. And I'm just like, this is really fascinating to me. And so my first summer after starting grad school, I was originally planning to do my doctoral research in Cuba, where I had done a lot of pre-existing work, but I split my summer between there and Southern California, and I was freelancing for People, covering Comic-Con in San Diego and covering events in LA. And I just, after a year of grad school and thinking about, you know, what it meant to study different spaces, I had a different awareness when I was working as a celebrity reporter and thinking, this isn't just interesting anecdotally for me. This is interesting on a really profound cultural level. And all of the pieces that I had started thinking about from the time that I started at People magazine, I mentioned this I think in the introduction, my very first event was covering the VH1 Hip Hop Honors Award, the very first one. And when I was on the red carpet, you know, one of the Black celebrities came up to talk to me, and they were like, oh, you work for White People magazine. Yeah, like that magazine's not relevant to me. And it was just this whole, like from the beginning, it was like, not only was I part of their very little bit of diversity, and so was sent to cover anything having to do with anything African-American or sort of Latino related, but then when I interacted with the celebrities there, they had this keen awareness of the limitations of what the work I could do might do for them in their careers, or how it might be relevant to them. So all of these pieces started to come together to me. And I thought, you know, anthropologists often want to study things that require access that you just can't get, especially a lot of the anthropology of journalism or these sort of industries. But I had the access, and I thought, this is really important. You know, not just Oscar So White, but all of the other inequalities and issues around race and gender that pervade this whole system. And I think it really can be easy to ignore because we don't see the back workings of this, right? Everything in Hollywood is presented, it's a fabrication, right? On shows, on movies, even reality television. And so what's the real deal of this celebrity making? And the fact that I had the ability to get the tools to tell those stories, it felt like I have to do this right now. So I don't know if that is the the full scope, but that's the best I can do in a short time.
No, what I appreciate about your response, though, is that you kind of talk about the ways that growing up in Southern California involved being surrounded by Hollywood culture, and consuming that culture was something that was a part of everyday life. And yet that's not the primary focus of the book, you know, in media consumption. And I think there's been a tremendous amount of research that's focused on media consumption and how it is that people interact with popular representations and how that shapes the stereotypes that they internalize and how they make sense of themselves. But you redirect attention to an entirely different issue, I think, in a profound anthropological way. So the best of what anthropology aspires to do in many ways is to think from a non-dominant perspective to tell a fundamentally different story about the world, and to take that perspective really seriously as a mode of analysis. And so you redirect attention from consumption to media production, and you look at the hierarchies involved in celebrity media production, particularly a hierarchy in which Latino paparazzi are collectively demonized in these very specific ways. And there's a kind of widespread embrace and acceptance of that demonization. And you intervene in that kind of the set of assumptions that informs the stigmatization of paparazzi. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what brought you to these insights to sort of understand celebrity media production from these different labor perspectives.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Again, I think there's so many layers, right? Obviously, my insight started really from the reporting perspective and understanding kind of what it meant to be on the red carpet, the different limitations of those events, who was on the red carpet, which celebrities were we talking to and not talking to. You know, I talk about this in the book as well, that, you know, Regina King, an amazing actor, that she was on a red carpet event and I wanted to interview her, and she walked up and said, "Oh, you want to talk to brown people too?" Because nobody was interviewing her. Nobody wanted to talk to her. And so I think if you're someone who experiences life in a particular way, where you've been thinking about race and experiencing these different questions around racialization, that you're automatically attuned to these things. No one else on the red carpet spoke to her except for me. And that's what she had to say to me. And we had a really intense engagement about that, because that's the reality for prominent Black celebrities on a red carpet that they're invited to. And when I remember the very first time that I went up to a paparazzo in a situation, just kind of thinking about my research, that I approached this young paparazzo who I had seen in a group, and they were speaking Spanish, and I approached him and I spoke Spanish to him and I introduced myself, and he was terrified of me. It was like this moment where I realized I walked off the red carpet and went and talked to the paparazzi, and because they understand the way that they're viewed within the larger context, his expectation was that I had a problem with him. And so his response to me, it was really powerful, because I was interested in his work and thinking about this research and thinking, oh, here's a young guy. I mean, at the time I was in my, you know, early to mid 20s. So I thought we're around the same age, but because I was coming off of the red carpet, he had this particular visceral reaction to what he thought I wanted with him, or the problem that I might have with him. And that was a really important moment for me to think about, okay, yeah, there's this reporting side and the red carpet is full of these issues, but you walk off the red carpet and there's this whole other world of laborers within the entertainment industry who not only are on the outskirts of these barricades of the red carpet, but they're treated fully and entirely as if they don't even exist within the industry, even though the pages of People magazine don't exist without them. The pages of Us Weekly don't exist without them. And frankly, you know, CNN and MSNBC and all of these organizations that publish paparazzi photos on their broadcasts and on their websites don't exist without them. And yet me, a freelance red carpet reporter, induces this level of uncomfortability in a young, really important media producer. And, you know, one thing that I think is important to clarify, because historians of celebrity and Hollywood always kind of take me to task on this, and I welcome it. It tends to be people who don't look critically at race, but it's important to know that, you know, paparazzi work was always demonized to extent, not the way that it is now. I mean, the term evolved from the 1960 Fellini film La Dolce Vita, and the annoying celebrity photographer was called paparazzo, which is Italian for mosquito. And so there was this idea that paparazzi were annoying. That was like the construction of the identity. However, when the paparazzi shifted, you know, demographically, and media started really saying, oh, it's all these undocumented people, it's all these people who are here on questionable visas, and celebrities started saying, all these large aggressive men are chasing me down, and they're gangs and they're criminals, and, you know, other people in the media industry saying, like, there's terrible quotes. They could be robbing a 7-Eleven, but instead they're like haphazardly trying to take pictures. I mean, terrible things that that was the transitional point where it went from paparazzi are an annoyance to paparazzi are dangerous criminals, large aggressive men. They're scaring our children. They're scaring us. We fear for them. It's when anti-paparazzi legislation in California starts that target them, not the people who publish them. There's all these really particular dynamics that started to come out. And so I think, as you can tell, there's just all of these levels, this like tiers of, you know, from the celebrities and the reporters to the paparazzi and the celebrities to the paparazzi and the larger kind of entertainment industry and the way that they're left out of what it means to be an actual viable media producer within Hollywood. I have lots more to say, but I'm gonna pause.
No, I think that you track this transformation where the nature of the work practices in which people are participating are either rendered as a legitimate form or even privileged form of labor versus a racialized form of work that ultimately positions people as disposable. So if you're a laborer, perhaps you have recourse to making certain kinds of demands, rights demands, but the sort of informal economy in which the paparazzi are participating, I think, and the racialized nature of the positionality that they inhabit is incredibly striking. And I think it's deeply unsettling for those of us who might have internalized these sorts of assumptions about the paparazzi as, oh, of course, everyone knows that is a parasitic or a predatory group of people, rather than saying, wait a second, this is a parasitic and a predatory structure that is producing this kind of racialized disposability. And I guess that brings me to my next question. You know, I think you really challenge readers to reconsider our analysis of what would need to change in popular culture or in the entertainment industry. And we tend to focus on a politics of representation and visibility. And we hear people say, you know, Oscar's so white, or people sort of saying representation matters, visibility matters. And in fact, you write, a central component of this book is understanding how the politics of visibility and invisibility affect these media producers and are critical to the maintenance of the celebrity system. So you challenge us to kind of reconsider invisibility, not simply in the representations themselves, but rather in the labor that's involved in producing these media. And so I guess I wanted to hear more about how you're asking us to reconsider our assumptions about visibility as a pathway towards progress or something of that matter.
I think it's such an important question right now. We see the questions around visibility coming up with the relationship to the presidential election. We see it coming up with all kinds of drama within the academy. I mean, this question is central to so many things right now, where the struggle for representation is real. And then we have to understand that it also has to go beyond that as well. You know, as you mentioned, Oscar's so white is sort of more known. Me Too came up in this particular way. And these are all important in calling out particular kinds of injustices. And the injustices around paparazzi work are not even really on people's radar. That's why I wanted to focus on it, because it's not even something, you know, the celebrities are out here saying all of this really terrible racialized stuff about paparazzi, but they're not even thinking about the consequences of it, because they know that that work isn't valued. No one in Hollywood is going to say, hey, that's really racist. You're calling these people illegals. You're saying that, you know, they're holding you in false imprisonment, but they're being held in false imprisonment. You're saying that you're being assaulted by them sort of emotionally in this particular way, but they're actually getting killed on the job. No one's holding them accountable to that because they're already not seen as valuable, right? So this question of lives mattering and the centering of particular kinds of representation, right, it's not enough. So there's plenty of people who have talked about the fact that not only is there it's such inadequate representation of all non-white people in the media, but in the context of LA, where you have a majority Latino population, that there is where is Latinx representation in the media, in Hollywood specifically? And right, there are these laborers, there are Latino laborers in Hollywood, you know, behind the scenes, and that's it's not even factored in because that work isn't even seen as sort of like actual viable labor. And I think that, you know, Hollywood has always existed to tell these same dominant narratives that we see in most whitewashed histories of the US, right? Hollywood narrative has always been one that centered normal, meaning white cishet family life. And Hortense Powdermaker, you know, the anthropologist who wrote the 1950 book, Hollywood, the Dream Factory, she wrote this very thing, that Hollywood was obsessed with showing what it meant to be normal. And so, you know, that's what the goal of showing in movies and TV and on the pages of magazine is creating this space so that non-white laborers are invisible. And, you know, one of the moments that comes up in the book in chapter 3, To Live and Die in LA, where I talk about Chris's killing, and I compare it to the killing of Sarah Jones, who was this 27-year-old white camera assistant on a film, and how these deaths were treated so differently. It says everything about this system and about these kind of narratives that Hollywood and the system are promoting around this question of who lives matter, because she was honored at the Oscars. There was candlelight vigils for her and celebration of her life. Whereas, you know, Chris gets killed and celebrities are like, oh, poor Justin and his poor Ferrari, and how can you put this on his conscience? And meanwhile, his family, you know, is mourning the death of their son who died trying to photograph white celebrities. And it's really, I think that those moments are incredibly profound in understanding the sort of layers and the different kinds of value ascribed to particular people and to particular kinds of work.
The kind of vulnerability that you point to, and the particular case of the in so many ways gripping and bittersweet case of your work with someone like Chris Guerra, who you got to know and as an aspiring photographer, and yet who faced this form of disposability, and a disposability that intertwined the kind of informal economy position that he was occupying or participating in, and policing. And so it was interesting to me the way that you use this phrase, Hollywood industrial complex, because we often hear people invoke prison industrial complex, military industrial complex, even nonprofit industrial complex, but you use this phrase, Hollywood industrial complex. And I was thinking about, you know, these questions about these glossy representations, these sorts of sanitized, normative representations, the kinds of labor hierarchies involved, and policing as on multiple levels. And so I guess I was interested in how you're making sense of, or what's at stake for you in this notion of a Hollywood industrial complex.
Yeah, thanks for this question. And I do want to point out, because you specifically brought up policing, that, you know, in this moment of talking about police abolition and the current moment of the Black Lives Matter movement, that there are calls to get police out of Hollywood, specifically on sets, right? Specifically from, you know, Black actors and organizers who are saying, why are we being policed on our set? Do we actually need these cops on our set? And so there is the sense that the infiltration, the ways in which Hollywood is infiltrated in and complicit in, and very much an integral part of these larger systems that run this country is very real. It's very, very real. The term the Hollywood industrial complex, right? So Eisenhower, in, you know, his farewell speech, he talked about the military industrial complex. That's the start of this all, the conglomeration of military and defense industries that promote war to sustain itself. And the Hollywood industrial complex, the way that I understand it, or the way that I've conceptualized or theorized it, is that it exists to sustain itself in a parallel fashion, right? With the celebrity system as its driving force. So celebrities are constantly created and promoted in order to stimulate consumption of Hollywood media, and vice versa. So there's this way in which it mimics the kind of cause and effect that the military industrial complex does. But I also use that term because, again, I think you know, you and I are both very interested in institutional kind of formations and understanding the way that institutions shape the kinds of policing we're talking about, and just white supremacist logics. And so I think when you give Hollywood the framing of an industrial complex, that it really underscores the intenseness and the seriousness and the gravity of the power of Hollywood institutionally. It's not just fun and games on screen. And while I understand that, you know, we have these moments with Oscar So White, and we have these moments with Harvey Weinstein being charged and arrested in these things where you see the abuses of power, but it needs, in my opinion, to be an everyday conversation. Hollywood is an industrial complex. Hollywood is a promoter and purveyor of racist stereotypes. It always has been. It's been the central promoter of normal white cis hetero family life. And by contrast, it's been an attacker of every other kind of identity formation of any kind. I mean, you just go back to Birth of a Nation and all of the racist films that came out around that same time about Latinx populations, about Asian populations, about Muslim populations. This has been the goal. So for me, it's really about underscoring the institutional significance and importance of Hollywood.
Part of what's so powerful about the book to me is that you not only document this profound form of disposability in which we collectively participate in some ways by consuming these media without necessarily having to understand the kind of work that goes into producing them, and the hyper invisibility or invisibilization of that work. But you don't just stop there. You don't just show us how someone like Chris, how his life is made ungrievable publicly. His family is grieving. But you don't just show us how he's made ungrievable publicly. You grieve with his family, and you center his family in the work that you're doing in the book, and their analysis of Chris's life, the way that they understand his life and the work that he was doing. And you build on Amy Cox's ideas about what she calls unconditional relationality. You write, unconditional relationality is not focused on theorizing ethnographic experience. It is about harnessing the complex transformations that occur through ethnography. So I guess I wanted to hear you talk a little bit about how you not only document these and analyze these systems of power and of hierarchy and exclusion, you also engage in an ethnographic practice or a mode of representation and analysis that honors life in very particular ways and honors particular kinds of relationships. And I think readers might be interested in hearing you talk a little bit about what informed that effort.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing up Amy Cox's work. It's so important. And also just thinking not just about the piece about unconditional relationality, but, you know, you brought up the question about why anthropology. And I think it's, you know, works like yours, works like Amy Cox's, these contemporary ethnographies that really present alternative possibilities for this engaged work that really is truly deeply personal, and that we allow, not only are we affected because we connect to the material in particular ways, but we're engaging in relationships that we know necessarily are going to be reciprocal. I think with Chris's story, there was absolutely a reciprocity that started early on. You know, just to share a little personal thing that I think connected me to Chris's family is, you know, my father was murdered when I was a kid, and there was never any charges. No one was ever found. It wasn't even a thing. It was just like, oh, he was killed, and oh well. And I saw that happen with Chris's death. And, you know, when I spoke with his family, we connected on that grief. And that feeling of like, why is it that particular people are treated as disposable? not even just disposable, but celebration of the death, right? In my father's case, is like, you know, a Puerto Rican radical activist who had a 500-page FBI file, and it's like good riddance. With Chris, it's like in the wake of his death, it was continued ridicule of paparazzi. You know, celebrities like Miley Cyrus are on Twitter saying, you know, don't put this on Justin's conscience. Like, you know, paparazzi need to learn better. Like, why are they doing, like, someone was killed and that's the reaction. So again, it's not even just disposability. It's like, I'm glad they're dead. That level of pain, when you feel like not only did someone die that you love and there's no recourse, the system is glad they're gone. The system that they worked for, that they produced for, is glad they're gone. And so I think there was this, you know, this feeling of connection that I had around that. And also just knowing that, you know, I had been talking with Chris's mom, Vicky, who's just done incredible work to try to bring justice for her son. But we had been in conversation over the phone, over email, and, you know, we finally met in person and sat down together. And I knew that she was going to hold my book and read my book. I knew she was going to see the things that we wrote, and it made me feel, you know, like I had a particular kind of responsibility to make this be work for all of us. And that even the production of the material of the book was a way of honoring the life that was cut short for Chris. And I think it's a similar thing with someone like Natasha, where, you know, I started my job at People magazine as a college student who was trying to learn from her. And then I became a researcher who she felt she could confide in about this terrible thing that happened to her. And so I think there's these levels of responsibility and engagement and relationship building that Amy Cox's concept of unconditional relationality for me really spoke to how deeply personal this is and how much responsibility we have. Like, we're critiquing power structures. We are also, as academics, as authors, we are also, you know, a part of these larger structural, institutional kind of situations that require us to think really critically and carefully about what we're producing and how we're producing and why we're producing it.
I think your effort to analyze these sorts of structures is you engage in some really compelling ethnographic strategies to understand what this industry looks like from the perspective of very different sectors with it of media production. And you show us what it looks like to work on a red carpet, what it looks like to work for paparazzi, what are the politics of labor, what it looks like to be a part of a production team in different ways. And I, you know, a part of what comes out in that analysis is the ways that these hierarchies articulate in relation to race, gender, class, so that the women reporters on the red carpet occupy a very different position, as you already explained, from the paparazzi, and yet are vulnerable in their own right in a whole range of ways. And I was interested in hearing you talk a little bit about these different sites. And I should say also, this will probably be the last question I'll ask for now before we open it up for Q&A. So if people want to provide, we already have a few questions, so if people want to provide any more, feel free to do so. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about these different ethnographic spaces of the red carpet, of, you know, of production spaces, working on the street with paparazzi, and the different sorts of vulnerabilities or the different dynamics that you were attending to in those spaces.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's really important. Yeah, the spaces are so different. I think for me, you know, the red carpet space, it's literally a physically barricaded space. So having access to that space, you're already experiencing, like when I would check in for an event, you're already experiencing all these different levels of kind of elitism in practice, where the paparazzi are positioned outside of the barricades, and then certain people are allowed within the barricades to have these interactions. At the same time, you know, in the context of the book, I turned the camera around. I have pictures of the red carpet reporters, not necessarily just of the celebrities, because even though, yes, that is an elite space, the reporters are treated in particularly problematic ways at different points on and off the red carpet, right? So a situation like Natasha's comes about because she was in the private home of a celebrity, which celebrity reporters who are predominantly women are asked to do all the time, to go to celebrities' homes. And I've talked to celebrity reporters who were specifically picked to interview a man who was a celebrity because they knew that she was his type. And they thought if they picked her to go sit down for an interview, he would talk to her more. But it wasn't just that he would talk to her more, it was these other expectations. Women were asked to, you know, try to get dates with celebrities. And this happened many times, many times, across celebrity reporters who I talked to. And so, you know, these different kinds of manipulations are very particular around gender and sexuality, and always a presumed heterosexuality, of course. And, you know, one of the things I talk about in the book as well is I have this section called Reporting While Black. And it's also incredibly important to think about the way that, you know, Natasha was treated in a particular way, and that was also a racialized experience. But when it comes to different forms of reporting, nightlife reporting, which was a really key part of celebrity reporting, you know, leading up to the financial crisis, especially after that, that kind of part of reporting changed. But a lot of the Black reporters talked to me about a lot of different issues, but one of them was that the nightclubs had quota systems. Even when celebrity reporters were asked to go report, if it was a Black reporter, they were told by security and by people running the door that there was too many Black people. That literally quota systems at these clubs that are recruiting celebrity reporters. So the levels of racial and gender and class capital that are at play here, it's a minefield. It's a minefield. And in terms of working on the street with paparazzi, again, yes, that perspective, you're looking in on the red carpet, or you're sitting outside of celebrities' homes and you see the way that they're being looked at and the way that they're being treated, and sitting with them and talking through that with them and them expressing to me. And that's the thing that I think is so important, is that in these different spaces, reporters and photographers might not have this immense amount of agency in the context of the Hollywood industrial complex, but their acute awareness of their position within the system, their critical perspective about that position in the system, and the way that they are manipulated in particular ways and targeted in particular ways is so important. And their participation in the dialogue with me and the analysis with me about this was really key. So I hope that kind of speaks to some of the questions you kind of outlined.
Absolutely. I think we can open it up for the Q&A now, and there are several questions. So I'm just gonna link a couple of them to one another, and we'll try to get through as many of them as possible. But one of the questions focuses on the symbiotic relationship between celebrity and paparazzi, and suggests that, you know, you can't have celebrity without paparazzi on some level. And you track the ways that, again, people become collectively invested in the production of celebrity figures like Brangelina, like the creation of this joint figure, or these sorts of imagined representations of idealized identities and communities and populations. And so that symbiotic relationship, I think, is something that if we could link to another one of the questions that's posed here. This is actually a question that is submitted by your indexer for the book, who is asking about the ways that in the discourse of essential workers in the context of the pandemic has raised questions about who fits within that kind of a category. And when we think about, again, the consumption of the production of these celebrity figures, and the ways that they symbiotically require this kind of disposable labor, to what extent is that disposable labor then a form of essential work on some level, but not a form of work that could ever be rendered as legally as essential, or as essential in such a way that you could, again, seek recourse to rights and resources?
Absolutely, yeah. Those are incredible questions and points. In terms of the symbiotic relationship, I mean, absolutely. There's, one of the people who has been, incredibly outspoken against paparazzi, and specifically paparazzi photography of children, is Jennifer Garner. And yet, Chris, prior to him being killed, had a friendly relationship with her of sorts, where, he had this set of photos that she said, yeah, like, go ahead and shoot this, but I stay hidden. I don't want you to like bother the kid, which is the thing, right? Is this like that when paparazzi are, supposed to be invisible. But that was like she okayed that. He took these photos with her permission. These photos sell in the wake of his death. They still circulate, but she's out there advocating against these images and yet giving permission in real time. These are things that celebrities don't want us to know or see. A lot of the time, as I said, Hollywood is about performance. A lot of the time, celebrities are performing that hatred or frustration or irritation with paparazzi precisely because it elevates their fame, right? I don't want to have my picture taken. I'm humble. I just want to be left alone and be a normal person. I want to be a normal, there's a lot of choices you can make if you don't want to be photographed by paparazzi. And the celebrities who say that, they're not making those choices. They're putting themselves in positions where they know they're going to be photographed, so then they can complain about it and create this conversation around, that it's invasion of privacy, when, I argue in the book that it's not really about privacy. It's about wanting to have sort of rights over money of your image and monetizing your image and monetizing your child's image. There's absolutely a symbiotic relationship. And beyond that, I mean, a lot of the paparazzi have celebrities' phone numbers, because, I mean, the Kardashians now, they've shifted sort of politically in their kind of place in celebrity. But in the earlier days, Kim was just calling the paparazzi, oh yeah, I'm going to be here. Can you come here and shoot me and my friends, or me and my siblings, or whatever? Because that was how she cultivated it. She cultivated it by calling on them. And they famously, had hired paparazzi to go on their family vacations and shoot their family vacations. That's what they did. So it's very strategic crafting of a narrative around the paparazzi as a problem. In terms of the essential worker question, yeah, it's an excellent question. I mean, Hollywood during the pandemic, most things were shut down for a long time. Things are starting to pick up. But yes, the production of paparazzi images put into crisis the way that the magazines and media in general would cover celebrities. So paparazzi were still out every day trying to get images, but obviously couldn't get the kinds of full face pictures and candid images that the magazines typically wanted. And so it led to what you saw was a lot of celebrities then doing selfies or having family members take pictures for them. So in the absence of paparazzi, celebrities basically have been given this sort of card to say, okay, well then you take pictures for us. And then it's whatever they want to craft themselves. But the reality is that when it comes to the value of images has always been around the kind of candid image. That's why paparazzi photographs have always been worth so much more than the red carpet, which is ironic in and of itself. The red carpet's this elite space, but everyone gets the same picture on a red carpet. Paparazzi images have the potential to have way more value because they can be a sort of surprise shot that only one person gets. But I think, just again, to highlight this question of essential workers, I would absolutely say that in the context of Hollywood, that if Hollywood could really reckon with the role and admit the central role that paparazzi play, that they would absolutely be essential workers. But because of the way that they've been positioned strategically as a scapegoat for all these problems, and the way they've been derided by celebrities, you're right, there's no way that they would be classified that way. But absolutely, the absence of their ability to do their work has put into crisis all of these other forms of media production that their work sustains.
I think that links to two of the other questions that we have here. So Rissel is asking, you know, in what ways might the creation of a union potentially, would that be something you would advocate for? So how do you respond to this? Is it just about formalizing the labor so it's not part of the informal economy? And there's another question from, or another question that's asking about how the shift in the demographics of the paparazzi has been reflected in the relationship between the paparazzi and the magazines that they work for. So what are the raw materials that are exchanged between the magazine and the paparazzi, and what's the nature of that interaction? And so yeah, and back to the Rissel question, what can we do?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go in a circular motion with these questions. There has been discussion earlier on in my research. There was a website that one of the paparazzos had started to call for unionization, but it didn't gain a lot of traction. And I think that a central component there was fear on a lot of different levels, because a lot of the work is done informally. I think there was particular kinds of fears around formalizing it in particular ways. And it just didn't gain enough traction. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad idea, but I think that paparazzi work is, you know, they conceptualize themselves very much as sort of part of this larger structure of informal Latinx labor. And we've seen these different kinds of unionization struggles in other fields, right? United Farm Workers, perfect example. There's been, you know, for decades and decades, there have been efforts at unionizing that have succeeded. And yet it's still a crisis, right? Farm workers, that movement was incredible and made all these changes, but farm workers remain in a crisis despite all of that. So I think that even if the idea felt important, it never gained enough traction where there was the kind of enough belief that it was that they could really do anything with it. And a lot of that does have to do, I think, with the informal nature of the work. In terms of the relationship with the magazines, I mean, this is another interesting part, right, that I touch on in the book, for sure, which is that the erasures that happen. So paparazzi, you can't sell directly to a magazine unless you have a really huge catalog of images and infrastructure. So paparazzi sell to an agency, and the agencies sell to the magazines. So the paparazzi aren't dealing directly with the magazines, and in fact, most of the time, the magazines aren't even publishing the bylines of the photographers. They're publishing the photographs under the name of the agency. So you have another layer of erasure, right? Where Chris Guerra might be taking the photo, but his agency is going to be listed. Galo Ramirez might be taking the photo, but his agency is going to be listed. And so that level of erasure is real in that sense too. And the way that their agency is shifted. I mean, Galo would always say, you know, they think that they hope that the agencies are paying them the percentage that they're entitled to, but they don't actually know because the agencies don't have to show them anything. They rely entirely on the agency's negotiation with the magazine. So there was one brief period that the magazines will never want to talk about where People Magazine and Us Weekly each had a paparazzo sort of under the table on staff, like on a formal kind of retainer. They weren't on the masthead, but it was at the kind of height of the paparazzi work in the mid 2000s. And they each had one because they wanted to like make sure they had someone on the ground all the time. That was the only time where there was even a kind of formalized thing. But again, they weren't on the masthead, even though they were working exclusively and consistently for the magazine. So hopefully that kind of touches on some of the questions.
Yeah, Galo has jumped into the Q&A to note that in terms of this conversation around essential labor, that the very sorts of photos that these magazines, that People magazine had stopped purchasing from the paparazzi, that it was exactly during the pandemic that People magazine began using those images from the paparazzi again. And so you see how they become essential, or the essential nature of the work that paparazzi are performing is underscored again and again, and yet never in a way that provides paparazzi with rights and resources and compensation for the work that they're doing. There are a few other questions, and I think this will have to be the last question. You know, people want to know about the chapter on body teams, the kind of sexualization involved in these representations, and people, I think, were sort of shocked. There's a whole chapter on body teams, and people were shocked by the explicit nature of these discourses. And if you could somehow say something about that topic really quickly, and very quickly say what's next, I guess we could wrap up from there. So I'll leave it in your hands.
All right. Yes, the body team stuff, that I think that is shocking to most people. The New York Times did an article several years ago about People magazine having a body editor. So that was like the one moment where it kind of became public. But all you have to do is look at the magazines to see the ridicule, you know, too fat, too skinny. But what was, you know, again, you talked about there's a lot on consumption. But in terms of production, it hasn't been a lot of research done on this. And so part of what I'm interested in talking about in the body teams chapter is not just how extreme the unrealistic sort of body expectations the magazines put on the readers, right? That Heidi Klum has a baby and then 2 weeks later is on the the runway show for the Victoria's Secret Angels wearing nothing. That's celebrated. I think I write about in the book an instance where one of the women reporters was asked to call a celebrity before she had even given birth to ask if they could start getting her ready to do a story, you know, a month after she gave birth. So these different levels of pressure that women reporters are forced to put on women celebrities as well, and the way that that impacts them. And again, this manipulation, that reporter, I can't remember if she was pregnant at the time or had just had a baby. So it's also putting this expectation on the reporters. They talked oftentimes about how it felt like the level of ridicule that they were putting on the women's celebrities really started to have an impact on their self-image, right? That they started to feel like, oh my God, am I too fat? Am I not, you know, all of the women who said, I never had a body image issue, but once my job became ridiculing these bodies every day and saying, oh, she has cankles, or she has this, or, you know, she gained 10 pounds, that they internalized it. And so that's a case study in and of itself. You don't have to ask, are the magazines doing damage to the population? They're doing damage to their own staff in this process. And so I think it was really important to look at the ways in which these tropes are so cyclical and continue to be the focus, this really particular kind of ridiculing. So even if we're focusing primarily on white women celebrities, that coverage is often ridiculing them as well, in these very particular ways. And you know, the few celebrities of color who might grace the pages are having the same experience. I mean, coverage of Oprah's weight gain and loss over the course of my lifetime, that was a central feature of all of the magazines always. So I think it was important for me to highlight not just these cyclical forms of coverage around pregnant women, around weight gain and loss, around completely unrealistic expectations of women, and the celebration of the unrealistic expectations, but also the ways in which these women reporters were profoundly impacted, to the point that they had to ask to be off the team, and some quit their jobs. I'm not gonna do this anymore because I'm actually ruining myself. So it was, for me, really important to think about these different, there's all these different sort of meta levels of issues that come up with the ramifications of the kind of racialized and gendered reporting and photography that we see. In terms of what's next for me, well, I am working on a documentary that's based on the paparazzi material. The section in the book on paparazzi is called Pappin' Ain't Easy, and that is the working title of the documentary. And Galo, who's in our chat room, one of my main collaborators on the research, thank you so much for being here. He is helping with the production, as is Lalo, who was another paparazzo I worked with. So again, this interest in working collaboratively with the people who I worked with on the research too. So we've been working on that, and really that documentary is about, again, centering the story of Chris and the way that Chris's life and death impacted the industry and the decision, for example, for Galo to leave the paparazzi industry. He came back in, but has left again. It really, these different modes of production, just like with the body team, some of the reporters are like, I have to get off the team or I have to leave the business. Chris's death had that experience for paparazzi. They're still grieving. They're still processing that as well. And there's no peace there. So I'm working on the documentary, and also I'm continuing to do work on the anti-paparazzi legislation, because I think, you know, as we're in this moment that continues to be intensely anti-immigrant, that looking at the anti-paparazzi legislation, thinking about the way that it questions the validity of the labor of paparazzi work, but also the way that it mimics anti-immigrant discourse and legislation, formally and informally, in the kind of promotional work around it, and the way that, you know, if you go to Malibu, for example, there's signs, paparazzi free zone, keep paparazzi out. It all brings up this conversation kind of akin to the wall and keeping these people out, and they're not welcome here. And that's what the legislation is about too. Don't let these people in our space. Don't let them near our children. It's, you know, talk about Leo Chavez's Latino threat. It's all it is this narrative about these paparazzi as a threat, who, not coincidentally, are predominantly Latinx. So that's kind of where I'm taking the work now.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for sharing with us about your work and all that's informed it and where it's going moving forward. I'm grateful to be in dialogue with you, and really excited about this project, and excited for it to be out in the world.
Yes, thank you so much for your generosity of time and the excellent questions, and for helping me navigate this. I'm so grateful to you.
This was so wonderful. Thank you both. Really just incredibly stimulating and thought-provoking conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I think from all the questions, it seems like everyone else did too. So again, just a huge thanks to Vanessa and Jonathan for this fascinating conversation. And thanks to all of you out there for spending your afternoon with us. If you haven't purchased the featured book yet, you can click the link in the chat, or simply head to harvard.com and search for Manufacturing Celebrity. Thanks for your support, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, have a good weekend, keep reading, and be well.
Thank you. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.